All right. Well, we are in the book of Acts, and we actually will probably make some progress in the actual book of Acts. But I can't remember. Did we talk at all about Galatians last week? I think I finished reading some stuff in Romans, and I don't think we actually talked. I'm not going to read from Galatians. There's some really good stuff in Galatians, but um, we'll talk a little bit about it. I'm just going to introduce the book. Just remember, Paul is still on his third missionary journey. He started in Antioch, went to, I can't remember if I didn't. Uh, uh, from Antioch, he went over to Troas, and then over into Macedonia, and then which is Philippi and Thessalonica. Went down to Athens in Achaia or Greece, and then down to Corinth, and then over to Ephesus, and spent 3 years in Ephesus, and then went back up to Troas, and then over to Macedonia again, and then back down, and he got down to Corinth again, stayed there for 3 months, and during that time he wrote the book of Romans and probably Galatians, although there's no way to verify when Galatians was written, but since it's similar materials, it may well have been right at this time, and so that's there's no better place to put it in a study, so we're just putting it there, which would make it about 57 AD, just 10 years exactly from the time the Roman armies entered the nation of Israel to lay it waste and destroy the cities, and especially Jerusalem. And so things are getting close. Anyway, Paul, we don't know exactly what was going on, why Paul felt the need to write about the law as opposed to grace and faith. But the most likely reason is that the Judaizing teachers everywhere were trying to make people follow the law, and Paul had to emphasize that it's by faith that we're saved, not by works of the law. And so he wrote it, sent one letter to the Galatians, which is off to the east in Asia, off to the east in Asia, and then he sent the other one to Rome, which was to the west. And between those two books, they would cover a whole lot of territory. And so I believe that's probably why he wrote those books. In Galatians chapter 4, verse 13, we learn that Paul had been to that area at least once. And of course, we know it from I'm sure he was there in the first and second missionary journeys, because there's the first cities that Paul came to on the first missionary journey, first cities in Asia at least, were Lystra, Derbe, Iconium, Antioch of Pisidia. All of those cities are in Galatia, the area of Asia that's called Galatia. And so we know he'd been there at least twice. And Galatians 1:6, the statement's made that makes it clear that they had to have at least some time in order to begin the apostasy that was taking place, because he says, I marvel that you are so quickly removed from the teaching and following after another gospel. So even though there had to be some time for this apostasy to start taking place, he says it's been way too short of a time for this to happen. He says, I can't believe you guys are turning away from the truth that I taught you to another gospel. And I'm certain that the other gospel that they were hearing, there's a play on words in that verse. He says another gospel, which is not another gospel, but some men have perverted the gospel. There's two different words for another, and one means another of the same kind, and one of the other word means another of a different kind. So they hadn't turned to a gospel of a different kind, like a totally different message, like Zoroastrianism or something like that. It was within the area of being a Christian, but it was certainly another teaching that Paul hadn't taught them. And I'm pretty sure it was having to do with the where the law fits in and how you compare grace and law.
No, it wouldn't be accurate to say, Carl, that those who cling to old law, they accepted Christianity only as an extension of or an addendum to the old law.
Now say that first part again.
Okay, yeah. Didn't these Galatians accept Christianity but as an extension of the old law or an addendum to it?
Oh, that's what they were saying.
I mean, is that kind of the doctrine Paul was confronting there?
No, I don't think Paul was saying that Christianity is just an extension.
No, he was fighting it.
Yeah, that's what he was fighting.
Yes.
Yeah. They were just trying to say it, essentially, that it was like it was tacked on. It was like you can't throw out the old law, although they threw out the parts that were convenient for them. Just like we do today. We have called cafeteria Christianity, where you go through the Bible and you pick out the stuff you like, and the other stuff you don't take, and that's not true Christianity. And so they weren't consistent, but they definitely were making a big stink and causing problems, and that's why Paul wrote these letters. So anyway, Galatians and Romans, as I've already said, deal with real similar subject matter, dealing with the law and the gospel. Well, I've already said that part. Just as a simple outline of the book of Galatians in chapters 1 and 2, Paul makes a personal defense of his authority. He does that in several of his books, where there's a lot of people that were questioning him. The apostles were appointed by Jesus himself, during his ministry while he was alive. And then Paul comes along claiming to be an apostle, and they're saying, you weren't even here. You weren't even a part of the group when Jesus was alive. How can you be an apostle? And they always say, yeah, Paul talks big when he's away, but when he gets here, he's weak, and just personal attacks on him. Just like today, if you can't attack the teaching, then attack the person, kind of thing. And that's what they were doing. So he felt it necessary to talk about his own credentials and he does it in 2 Corinthians, and he does it in Galatians here. So that's what he does in the first couple of chapters, especially saying that when I first was taught the gospel, I didn't come and consult with the apostles at all. Everything I got was by revelation. In fact, when I first became a Christian, I went off to Arabia, and it was 2 years before I came down to Jerusalem. And then when I did, I only stayed for 15 days and didn't really consult with the apostles about anything. And then he was off. And so anyway, so he's trying to establish his authority as being from God. He didn't get anything from the apostles themselves. He got it directly from God. Then in chapters 3 and 4, he is the doctrinal section where he talks about faith versus the law. And in chapters 5 and 6, just like Paul does many times in his books, he talks about doctrine. He'll do introductions kind of stuff. They'll talk about doctrine, and then he'll talk about practical stuff, partly how to put this stuff into action. And so that's what he does in chapters 5 and 6, is the practical things about it, how to this is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And so it's a great book. Both Romans and Galatians are great books. And we put them here. I talked about them here simply because that's where Paul wrote them. And it just helps when you study, if you just remember, here's what Paul was doing, what might have been on his mind when these books were written, and help put them in their place. And so what I wanted to do before we enter into continuing on with the book of Acts in Acts chapter 20 is just mention where we are. I guess I'll come back to this map. We'll just read a little bit first, and then we'll come back to the map. But it's been so long since we actually looked at the text that I need to emphasize when the book of Acts chapter 20 starts, it's really a continuation of 19, where Paul is at Ephesus and the big uproar had just taken place with Demetrius and the silversmiths and all that, and Paul was fearful of his life. Anyway, this is where we are right now. Paul, we already covered this first couple verses, so I'm going to read them fast, but we just need to figure out where we are right now. He's in Ephesus. After the uproar had ceased, Paul called the disciples to himself, embraced them, and departed to go to Macedonia. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what was probably on his mind as he embraced them and was heading off to Macedonia. What was Paul's primary purpose for his travels right now besides the gospel?
Take funds to Jerusalem.
Collecting money to take to the saints in Judea and Jerusalem. And so he's bound to do this, but he has something on his mind as he's making this journey. We're going to see as we get into chapter 20 a little bit, so we'll talk about it then. But just remember, he embraced them and felt close to them personally, and then he left to go to Macedonia. And now when he had gone over that region of Macedonia, he encouraged them with many words. Then he came to Greece, and while he's in Macedonia, that's where he writes 2 Corinthians. We already talked about that. And then he came to Greece, stayed there 3 months. That's where he writes Romans and Galatians. And when the Jews plotted against him as he was about to sail to Syria, he decided to return through Macedonia. And so I'm going to back up here. He's in Corinth, just wrote Romans and Galatians. Now he's heading with the bounty, with his collection down here to Syria. He's coming down. Apparently was going to land at Syria and then head down to Jerusalem. And so anyway, he was going to do that, which would have been a long boat ride. But instead, he decides to go back through Macedonia. Now, he doesn't explain anything about the actual purpose of it, but we learn something here in the next few verses. It says, and Sopater of Berea accompanied him to Asia. Also Aristarchus and Secundus of the Thessalonians, Gaius of Derbe, and Timothy, and Tychicus and Trophimus of Asia. Now, why do you think he mentions all the nations with all these people? He doesn't mention Timothy, a nation connected with him. Why do you think all these guys he mentions? All right, these were the guys that the congregations were, or the areas where they had collected money from. They had sent these people with Paul for this collection, and so he names them here. There's Berea, which is in Macedonia, and there is Aristarchus and Secundus, who are from Thessalonica, which is also in Macedonia, and Gaius from Derbe, that's over in Asia. That's over in Galatia, actually, part of Asia. And then Timothy and Silas had been left up in either Berea or Thessalonica. And so Timothy is one of the ones that's probably carrying bounty from that part of Macedonia. And then Tychicus and Trophimus from Asia. They might have been from Ephesus or any of the 7 cities of Asia. Anyway, they're carrying the money from Asia. These men going ahead waited for us at Troas. See that little two-letter word? What does that mean? Luke is now with them again. he had left Luke in Philippi, if you remember, and now he's back up to Asia, or back up to Macedonia, which Philippi is this town. And so when he gets there, then Luke joins again. And all these men were going to go ahead and wait at Troas. But we, that is Paul and Luke at least, sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and in 5 days joined them at Troas. 5 days sailing across that short little stretch. They're up here, either probably they're at Philippi, and they're just, all they're doing is going from there to there. It took them 5 days. That tells you a little something about the weird conditions that can happen in the Mediterranean. I didn't read about it, but in Second Corinthians, one of the places where Paul is making a defense of himself, he talks about all the things, the perils and the beatings and being left for dead. And he says he was shipwrecked 3 times. A day and a night he spent in the deep. Not one of those had are even mentioned in the book of Acts. The one that we're going to read about in the future is still in the future. And so there's a lot that Luke doesn't tell us. And you're going to see Paul being a little shy about going on the water. This is why, because sometimes things don't go well. And it happened quite often with Paul, apparently. But anyway, they were sailing. It took them 5 days just to get down to Troas. And it says, we sailed away after, and we went to Troas, where we stayed 7 days. Now, that may or may not be important, the fact that they stayed 7 days, but to some people, they make a big point of it, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So he says, now, on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message until midnight. And so the first day of the week, they came together to break bread. And Paul, because he was going to leave the next day, he decided to speak to them. And he talked a long while. We'll talk about that more in a bit. But now this verse, Acts 20:7, is the verse that's always been used by churches of Christ to establish the day of assembly, first day of the week, getting together, and also establishing the fact that we need to partake of the Lord's Supper every first day of the week, not every 3 months or once a year like some denominations do. And we place a lot on it. And I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but I just want to say you have to be very careful. I'm certainly all for taking the Lord's Supper on the first day of every week. I'm not at all opposed to that. That's one way that we can know absolutely for certain that we're doing what God wants from us. Jesus said when he instituted the Lord's Supper, as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you do so in remembrance of me. And so we're supposed to do it. He doesn't specifically mention a frequency when he is instituting it, but I have no problems with once a week. But what I do have an issue with is where it says they came together to break bread. We automatically assume that that's the Lord's Supper. But in Acts chapter 2, verse 47, it says the disciples continued steadfastly in the breaking of bread and prayers daily in their own homes and in the temple, in the breaking of bread and prayers. That breaking of bread is exactly the same phrase. And they did it daily. They were doing that stuff daily. And the phrase actually just means taking food. It can be either eating the Lord's Supper, which is a specific application, I guess, of that phrase, or it can be Thanksgiving dinner, or it can mean just having lunch at Taco Bell. You don't want, if you want to be honest with the scriptures, you can't make it say something, even though it's convenient for you. You can't make it say something that it doesn't say. And so to try to use the argument that they came together to break bread, in other words, the Lord's Supper, that really, you can't say that. And I don't say that to, the only reason I'm even saying it is just because somebody can come along from another denomination or from a denomination somewhere and saying, look, that phrase is the same phrase that's used in Acts 2:47, where they're just talking about a meal, and other places where it's just talking about eating food. When Peter in Acts chapter 10, in verse 10, where Peter was on the roof, and just about when Cornelius's entourage, or the messengers from Cornelius were coming down to get him to go back up and preach to Cornelius. He was on the roof about noon, and he was hungry, and so he called for some food to be brought up, and he had that vision of all the clean and unclean beasts and everything. Well, it said he was hungry, and he was wanting to eat. The same phrase as we're going to see a little bit later, where Paul took food and ate, the same phrase. And so there's nothing at all wrong with us doing it every first day of the week. I think it's a great way to do it. But for brethren to divide over that thing, I don't think you can do that, because this verse doesn't say what we try to make it say. But anyway, if anybody have a comment, Gene?
I'm not going to belabor it either, Carl, but I've always felt that when I taught this, that observing the Lord's Supper weekly is universally acceptable.
Yeah.
Nobody could argue that is not scripture.
And that's why I never say anything about it or try to change anything, because that's a good way for us to have unity on this whole thing. But then if somebody else comes along and, I don't know why anybody would want to come and change it, knowing the division it would cause. I would question that if anybody had that in mind. But anyway, I agree with those sentiments. Okay.
I know of a denomination that takes it only every 3 months because they say that it becomes too ritualistic if they did it every first day of the week. So they've changed it just because they don't want it to become whatever.
Yeah. I've heard that argument before as well, and that comes down to we take Saturdays off. You just decide to take it one Saturday every 3 months off, just so that you don't get too used to having every Saturday off. You could argue back and forth of whether that really makes sense or not. But anyway, the whole point of it is to remember Jesus, remember his death and suffering. And it only gets trite or too day to day if you don't observe it properly. If you do treat it as this is just something else we do, then you can do it every 3 months and it'll still get that way. And look what happened with Christmas. People got so used to observing it. Now they don't really even observe the birth of Christ, really. It's just a time for giving gifts and having fun, family getting together and stuff, So it doesn't matter how often you do it. It's what's in here and here that really counts. So anyway, any other comments? Okay, well, let's get on then. So Paul was preaching until midnight. I'm sure you're glad that I don't preach till midnight. And I'm glad I don't either, because I would be seeing a whole bunch of people sleeping.
Which we're going to see in a minute.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, he preached till midnight, and it says in verse 8 that there were many lamps in the upper room where they were gathered together. That's kind of interesting too, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it specifically says it was an upper room. And the one thing that's consistent about every time that people that were gathered together for the Lord's Supper, the one thing is consistent is the upper room. That's pretty crazy when you think about it. Jesus instituted in an upper room. Here they were in an upper room. Every other example is the upper room, and yet we don't bind that. You know, it's kind of interesting. I'm not going to talk about it here, but anyway, I think the reason for him mentioning it, that they were in the upper room, is because heat rises, and there were many lamps in the upper room where they were gathered together. Now, what were the lamps like that they had in those days? Halogen or there were just oil lamps. And with oil lamp, what do you have? You have a flame and smoke. And so you got heat and smoke. Smoke gets in your eyes and you have a little trouble keeping them open just from the smoke. And then somebody's preaching till midnight. Luke explains why this next thing happens. And in a window sat a certain young man named Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep. Well, we all understand how he could do that, or why he could do that. Now, the young man, we always think about, in their culture, up until 40 years old, you were called a young man. So he may have been 39 for all we know, but young-ish, how we would call it. Perhaps he was a teenager, who knows? But he was sinking into a deep sleep. And these words here in the next verse are continuous action ones. It was like this process that was happening. He didn't just go to sleep. He was, I don't know how many of you saw Mr. Bean, where he's trying to stay awake in church. Have you seen that one? Or, you know, he's going like this, and then he puts his head over on the next guy's shoulder, and he jumps up and looks around. You know, it's a whole process of nodding off. It's hilarious to watch, and part of why it's so hilarious is we can relate to it ourselves, trying to stay awake in church sometimes. And so anyway, this guy is falling asleep, and he was overcome by sleep. He was falling, boom. Now he's overcome by sleep. And as Paul continued speaking, he fell down from the third story and was taken up dead. And if you do the calculation, if each story was 8 feet, which our stories now are 10 feet, but they certainly had shorter ones, I'm pretty sure. So 8 and 8 is 16, and then you add 4 feet to get up to the window. Now you're talking 20 feet where he fell out from. 20 feet is a long way to fall and hit the ground. And he fell out. And you can just try to picture yourself. How many of you have ever, well, one time I fell asleep in church when I was a kid. I was probably 12, 13 maybe. And I fell asleep, and I started having a dream that I was on a runaway stagecoach. And just about the time that stagecoach was going to go around a corner, that it was going to go off a cliff, I jumped out. But I didn't jump out of a stagecoach. I jumped out of my pew. And so I know when he fell out that window, I'm sure that he was awake long before he hit the ground, and he probably was just after he lost balance and realized. I'm sure there was a little bit of a commotion just from him saying some exclamation of some sort, and everybody knew, oh no, Eutychus fell out. And so he did that, and it says that he fell from the third story, and he was taken up dead. Some people ran downstairs really fast, just like any of us would do. Somebody falls out a window, somebody that we know. I don't see any young-ish folks here right now, but just say if Brandon or Brendan or Bo, one of those guys fell out the window, obviously you'd be super concerned, and you'd run there. And I'm sure that you just try to put yourself in the place. Oh no, he's not breathing, and check his pulse, whatever. Oh, he must have broke his neck. He's dead. And then bringing him up, Paul Eutychus died. He was taken up dead, but Paul went down. I guess he wasn't taken upstairs. He just was picked up off the ground. Paul went down the stairs and fell on him, and embracing him said, "Do not trouble yourself, for his life is in him." So Paul Paul raised him from the dead. He breathed life back into him and said his life is in him. And now when he had come up and had broken bread and eaten and talked a long while, I won't read the rest of that sentence right now, but Paul just makes kind of like, don't worry, he's alive. Like nothing, no big deal had happened. Yeah, that is a big deal. One time, before Sue and I got married, I lived in a place where there was a lake, and well, it wasn't in the lake. The people had a swimming pool, and she had fallen into the pool and died. She drowned, and the people were so distraught and everything. But can you imagine if somebody had just come along and says, "Oh, she's not dead, she's alive," and just picked her up, and all of a sudden she starts breathing and everything? What the relief would be for that. That's the kind of thing that this was. And when he came back up, it says he had broken bread and eaten. Well, that phrase "eaten" is the same one where I was telling you in Acts chapter 10, where Peter is on the rooftop, got hungry about noon, and he wanted to eat. That's the same word that's talking about here, that actually taking a meal. Well, Paul ate, and then he talked with them. He had broken bread and eaten. So that phrase "broken bread" is the same one from earlier about the disciples gathering on the first day of the week to break bread. Anyway, he then talked with them a long while. And that word "talked," you can see the definition over there. It means to be in company with, to associate with, to converse with. This is not the same kind of talking as me doing right now with you, where I'm teaching or preaching. This is just, being friendly with people, having company with them. So he had been preaching to them till midnight. Now he's just eating some food and just talking with them. And we're gonna talk more about that again, about what he might have been talking about for a long while, even till daybreak. And then he departed. So he left. So they're in Troas, and now he's leaving, and they brought the young man in alive, and they were not a little comforted. That means they were a lot comforted. They were so happy that this young man had not died. Well, then verse 13, it says, "Then we went ahead to the ship." So Luke's with them still. They went ahead to the ship and sailed to Assos. I'm just going to look ahead for a minute. Let me get the little red pointer going. So they're in Troas. They sailed down to Assos, which is, you can barely see. There's not much distance. They're going around to Assos. Notice they're going to be hugging the coast. This map isn't exactly right. I'll show you where it goes off. But anyway, they go to Assos. They're intending to take Paul on board. So let's hear the explanation. For so he had given orders intending himself to go on foot. And so whoever the we is, we know it was at least Luke, because it wouldn't be we if it wasn't. So Luke and some others sailed, but Paul did this. He went by land, going across to Assos, traveling on foot. And that's one of those places where Paul had a chance not to sail, so he did. He went on foot instead. And verse 14, and when he met us at Assos, we took him on board and came to Mytilene. Well, actually, before we go further, that 2 Corinthians reference is the place where, if you want to go through, and where Paul talks about all the things that had happened to him, and including being shipwrecked and day and a night in the deep. That's the verse that I couldn't remember what it was, but that is for 2 Corinthians 11:25, where he's talking about that. That's why I'm pretty sure that's why he went on foot, is so he didn't have to sail any more than he had to. Anyway, when he met us at Assos, we took him on board and came to Mytilene. So Mytilene is right here. So they left Assos and sailed to Mytilene. And this island here is called Lesbos. And you can probably guess well, I don't know which came first, the name of the island or the name of the practice, but I think you know just from the name of it what kind of stuff happened at that island would get its name, would get named for that.
I don't know that. What do you mean?
Lesbos.
Oh, I thought you meant Mytilene.
Oh no, the city is Mytilene. The island is called Lesbos. Anyway, okay, so they, you notice they're not going very far at a time. They're going from one to the next. So this is not a very good sailing, and they're staying really close. This one here has him just sailing straight across to Troas. Well, if it took 5 days, they probably did this, hugging the coast the entire way, because the closer you are to the coast, the less chance of getting into the open sea and the terrible waves that are out in the open areas. And so they're hugging the coast here, and it says he met us at Assos, and we took him on board, came to Mytilene, and we sailed from there. And the next day came opposite Chios, which is this little area here, and it's just an island. They came through Chios, and the following day we arrived at Samos and stayed at Trogyllium. A lot of weird names. This map really doesn't let you see it very well, but Samos is really, it's this island here. This is where the map, the line of the map is wrong. They actually went along this coast and through. There's a passage here that's just about a mile, not more than a mile wide. This island is Samos, but Trogyllium is, I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a little promontory sticking out right at the tip of that promontory, 1 mile across to Samos. That's Trogyllium. And so they were hugging the coast. That's the point I want to make. They're hugging the coast, and went through this little narrow passage here, and then down. We'll see now. They came down to Miletus. The next day we came down to Miletus. Now, Miletus was a port city for Ephesus. It was about 30 miles from Ephesus on the Meander Delta. The Meander is a river. And how do you think it got its name?
meander.
Meanders.
going back, forth, like that. And so Ephesus or Miletus is on the Meander River, and it's on a delta. Who knows what a delta is?
A landmass formed by settling out of a river body of waters.
Okay, so as the river comes down, it's bringing dirt with it, collected from however long the river's been running, bringing dirt with it, and it dumps it when it gets down. Some rivers come out at a steeper angle, so the dirt just gets dumped off. Nothing happens with the coastline, but some of them, this one's called the meander. And why would a river go like this?
It doesn't have very much drop to it.
Exactly. It's pretty flat and level, and so it's going to dump. When it gets out there, it's going to dump, and so the delta is going to grow and grow and grow. Well, this delta had grown 30 miles because originally Ephesus was coastline or very close to the coast. Now it's 30 miles away. So over, some hundreds of years, this delta had formed and formed and formed. So now to get to Ephesus, you had to go up the Meander River about 30 miles. And so Paul stops there, and we're going to see why he stops there. For Paul had decided to sail past Ephesus. He didn't want to stop there. He had just been there not long before, spent 3 years there, and he didn't want to stop there because he was in a hurry now. Time was approaching. He needed to get down there. Sailing obviously was difficult now. It was taking him so long to get that short distance that he's traveled right from Philippi down to Ephesus. He's still got to go all the way down to Syria. Anyway, he doesn't want to stop in Ephesus. And so what he did from Miletus, well, he was hurrying to be at Jerusalem, if possible, on the day of Pentecost. So he was in a hurry now, and it was time we're getting close, apparently. So from Miletus, verse 17, Miletus, he sent to Ephesus and called for the elders of the church. He says, okay, we're stopping in Miletus. Now we're going to learn a little bit later that they stopped and were stayed 7 days at a place, and it was because the ship had to unlade its burden. He may have had a little bit of a layover for a few days because of the ship changing cargoes here in Miletus. And so he sent for the elders, said, come on down here, because I don't want to take the time to come up to Ephesus. And so verse 18, when they had come to him, he said to them, you know from the first day that I came to Asia, in what manner I was lived among you. I just looked at the clock, and it's time, before we even talk about what Paul said to the elders at Ephesus, we're going to have to stop there. And it's a great and touching story about what went on here. So we'll save that for the beginning of next week's Acts class. Any questions or comments before we cease? All right, thanks for your attention, and we'll be back again here in 15 minutes for our worship service. If anyone loves me, he will keep my word. My Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. So just like Brian said at the beginning, and I think Philip's going to talk about it a little bit at the end, no matter what happens, if we keep his word, if we love him, Jesus and the Father will come into our lives and make their home with us. And if you have him for a father, like the old saying goes, my dad can beat your dad. So with him as a father, there's nobody else that can defeat us for eternity's sake, at least. So let's keep loving Jesus, no matter what happens. You don't have to get angry with him if things don't go our way. He loves us. Let's love him back and let him and the Father make their home in us. We're talking, just started a series on the person Jesus, who he was as a man and his ministry as a man. Obviously, we'll be talking about his more spiritual qualities, Son of God type qualities as well. But I wanted to emphasize that this person that came to live, we already talked about the fact that he was the message of God. In the beginning was the Word, and Jesus was in existence long before he ever became a person on this earth. And he is existing now long after his physical body no longer exists. But anyway, this person, Jesus, we talked about last week in the surrounding his birth, an angel appeared to some shepherds out in the field and made the most wonderful announcement that has ever been made, that the Messiah has come into the world, the one who can save all of our lives, our spiritual lives. And today that was out of the book of the Gospel of Luke. Matthew records another event, and that is the visit of the Magi. We're going to be reading where it says wise men came. The actual word that's there is the Magi. And we don't say that, we say wise men, because we understand that a little bit better than Magi. But we're going to talk about that as we go through. We're going to talk about the significance of this visit of the Magi. In Matthew chapter 2, in verse 1, it says, "Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem." It's kind of interesting that we have visitors this morning from Ephrata. Bethlehem is called Bethlehem Ephratah, which is the same exact spelling as Ephrata. I'm not sure if that's where the town got its name. I don't know anything about that, but it's kind of curious that we're talking about Bethlehem on this day of having these visitors. But anyway, they're almost not like visitors anyway. So, but Jesus was born, a little child, and this is after he was born. We don't know how long it was. Could have been a few days, could have been months. But no matter how long it was while he was still in Bethlehem. And these men, they're called wise men here, called Magi. They came from Jerusalem. Well, the question that would come to your mind is, who were these wise men that came from the east? It says, the original language says the Magi came. Who were they? Well, if you look at the historical facts about it, the Magi were a tribe of the Medes. The Medes, the Persian Empire had started out as the Median Empire and became the Medo-Persian Empire, and then became the Persian Empire. Anyway, a tribe of the Medes, one of the tribes was called the Magi, and they, can't seem to get everything to go just the way I want it to every time, but this is supposed to say, okay, it's just not gonna cooperate. Now I'm trying to remember what it's. Well, that's one of the things. Underneath it, it says something else that I was trying to figure out what I put in there. Anyway, these guys had a priestly function, so they were more than just wise men, I guess you would say. In the court of Babylon, they were responsible for interpreting dreams. We all know something about interpreting dreams in Babylon with the story about Daniel. Certain ones couldn't interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, but Daniel could. Well, it was these Magi were the ones that couldn't interpret dreams, but they were also astrologers and astronomers. Sorry that you can't exactly read it, but there's a difference between astrology and astronomy. Astrology is trying to make something out of the movement of the stars, like to be able to predict future and things like that. Astronomy is just about the stars, what they are, where they are, what they do, what they're made out of, all those kind of things. And the Babylonians and the Egyptians had gotten very deep into astronomy and being not knowing what stars really are. People had gotten superstitious about that sort of thing, and that's why astrology came into being. You know, that certain movements were causing certain things in these shapes. They invented, you know, a bear and a lion and twins and all those constellations, and made it part of their religion. That's where the priestly ideas come in with the Magi. So they were kind of a potpourri of folks, had a priestly function, interpreting the dreams by astrology and paying attention to the sky, to the stars, and what was their movements and what they were doing. They named some of them planets, and a planet just means a wandering star. Some of the stars stay fixed as you look up at Orion, the constellation Orion, and it's always Orion. The stars are always in the same place. But you look up at the moon and sometimes you see one or two what looks like stars to us getting really close to it, and then next time around they're far away, and next thing you know they're not even in sight. But then pretty soon you see them again and it's like, wait a minute, those ones are moving. And so they were trying to figuring out how that happened, and they didn't know. They made up all these superstitions about it. Anyway, that's what it was all about. These guys were just like today. We say it's not rocket science. Well, these were the rocket scientists of their time, the astronomers, and looking at and figuring that all the mathematical things involved in predicting where they come up and all, how, you know, what time of year you see them first and all that. It required a lot of observation, and these guys were dedicated to that. And so when something new happened in the sky, they knew about it because they knew what the sky was supposed to look like, and they even followed the planets in their movements as they looked up at the sky nightly and that sort of thing. And so you and I, you could go out tonight and look at the sky, and if there was an additional star out there, you wouldn't know it. Could care less. And that's probably what happened with all of the people in Israel. They weren't astronomers. They didn't know, you know, if they looked up one night and Orion was missing in the middle of winter, you might notice that because it's pretty obvious. But anyway, these guys were very intelligent, but they had nothing to do with the children of Israel, other than some of the children of Israel were over in that part of the country in Babylon for 70 years during the Babylonian captivity. And these guys, because they cared about astronomy and astrology, they would listen to every story wherever it came from. And we're going to read a story in just a little bit that might have affected their thinking a little bit. So we'll continue to go a little bit further. They came to Jerusalem and they said, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." And so we saw a star. We said, "We've seen his star in the east." Well, did you even know he had a star? Who knew he even had a star? Somehow they knew he had a star, and we saw it. We noticed it. When we were in the east, they came from the east, and that's where they saw the star and followed that star and came to Jerusalem, but they didn't know any further at this point. So they were inquiring in Jerusalem, where is this king that was supposed to be born? And of course, we're not going to read about it, but Herod starts thinking, wait a minute, there's a king? Well, there's not going to be for very long. And we'll talk about that next week. But they came and says, we came to worship this new king. We saw his star. Well, that star, once again, Bethlehem. The beautiful star of Bethlehem is what they saw. It says, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them until it came and stood over where the young child was. Now, this is not your ordinary star. Stars don't do this kind of thing. They had seen the star and headed west from where they were, but when they got to Jerusalem, they didn't know where to look from there. But when they left Jerusalem, it says that the star which they had seen in the east went before them until it came and stood over where the young child was. Now, stars don't just do that. And even if a star did move, it wouldn't get so specific that you could tell what house he was in. And so something very special was happening. And when they saw that star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. Well, you can imagine, this is something that no one had ever in the world seen. Thousands of years of human history, no one had seen this sight, and no one ever was going to and ever will see that sight again, that this star would actually move and stand over where a place so you could know the exact place where something was. Very special star indeed, and they rejoiced with great joy. These guys had made a trip of over 400 miles, not on an airplane, not on a boat, not on a train, but either on camels or on horseback or walking, one or the other, maybe in a chariot or something like that that was drawn by horses. But they had made a long, long journey. So somehow they really trusted in what they believed to be about this star. And they had made a very, very long journey. So why did they make that journey? Where did they get the idea that there was going to be a star of this king? Well, it had been foretold. Long, long hundreds of years before, it had been foretold. And it had been told by a prophet by the name of Balaam. Now, this Balaam we're told in the book of Numbers, he was from the east, from Aram, which is all over in the direction of Babylon and Persia and those areas. He was from the east. So it's kind of interesting that this prophet from the east makes a prophecy, and then men from the east take that prophecy and do something about it. But the prophecy is this in Numbers chapter 24. It says, the utterance of him who hears the words of God and has knowledge of the Most High, who seeks the vision of the Almighty, who falls down with eyes wide open. This is Balaam talking. And so he's saying, I am one who hears God's words and have the knowledge of the Most High. I see visions and I fall down when I see them, and my eyes are wide open. I see what's happening. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob. A scepter shall rise out of Israel. And then he goes on from there. Now, this happens to be a dual fulfillment prophecy where it first appears in David, who comes and does some of the things that are talked about later on, conquering certain nations and that sort of thing. But as we know, David was the forerunner of the Messiah. He was the one that the Jewish people looked forward to this one coming from the lineage of David, the root of Jesse, and what that was going to be the Messiah. These guys were from the east, and this vision, this prophecy from a man, one of their own type of folks, somebody from the east, that's how they knew, would have known about this prophecy. And also the children of Israel had been captive there for 70 years, and they would certainly have spread a lot of their understanding of the scripture to people who were interested in it. And the Magi people could have learned from them about this prophecy. But either way you look at it, they knew that there was supposed to be a star, and they were looking for it. And what we don't know really is how they identified it or anything like that. But they were looking for it. It had been prophesied, and so they head west. That's a big journey to take, to start walking 400 miles in expectation of seeing something. And they weren't disappointed. They came, Herod sent them to Bethlehem, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them until it came and stood over where the young child was. And so they travel and finally come to where he was. And when they had come to the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshiped him. Now here's people, nothing to do with the Israelites, didn't believe in Jehovah God. They had another name for their gods. They looked to the stars to govern their lives and all that. These guys that would be classified by the Israelites as heathens, they received a message that there's going to be a king born. And they says, we want to come honor this guy. Now, if those kind of folks would want to come and honor this king, do you think that we should feel the same way and want to just honor this king that was born into the world? Yeah, I mean, certainly. This was just like the shepherds. You think, why did God reveal it to shepherds? We talked about that last week. Why did God reveal this information to people from Persia? Well, God's trying to give us a message that everybody needs to hear this message. And so they came and fell down and worshiped this little child, this little one. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him. And I just showed some pictures of some things that they might have carried their treasure in. If they came on camels, they'd have to tie packs to the camels and whatever. But they presented gifts, and these gifts were gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now the pictures show a little bit. Frankincense gets to be crystals formed. They're both, frankincense and myrrh are both plant-based, and from the sap that grows out of certain trees, and then you squeeze it and you can make a liquid out of it. But both of them are very similar. And so I want to talk about each one and why these particular. Was this just an accident? First of all, that these wise men saw the star. There's nobody that would say that was just an accident. And it wasn't an accident what they brought with them as gifts either. First one was gold. Now gold, as we all know, is of great worth. I don't know how much dollars it is an ounce right now, but I don't know if anybody even knows it. But hundreds and hundreds of dollars just for 1 ounce of gold. It's something that's of great worth. Not just everybody can have a brick of it in their under their mattress or wherever they want to put it. But it's a symbol of wealth. If you have a lot of gold, you have a lot of wealth. But it's also a gift for royalty. And as they were coming, they were bringing gifts for royalty, for a new king that was being born. This is signifying that Jesus really is a king. And they were expecting that there to be a king. Gold is also known for its purity. There was no more pure life that was ever lived on this earth than Jesus. From the time he was a little baby where they came to visit him now until his life ended on the cross, he was pure, absolutely pure. He never committed sin. And all the utilities of the temple were gold. Everything having to do with the worship were made out of gold. And that includes even the altar of incense, which is what we're going to talk about next. But the significance of this gift of gold would not be lost on Mary and Joseph. This was a valuable child that they had, that they were going to be stewards of his life all the time until he left home. Second one, well, once again, was frankincense. And frankincense was used as incense. That was one of the things frankincense was used for, to make things smell good. And in Luke chapter 1, in verses 10 through 13, remember when Zacharias, before Jesus was born, John the Baptist was born, and Zacharias was in the temple, and the lot fell to him to burn incense at the altar of incense. That was his job. And as he was doing that, God came to him and said, "Your prayers have gone up as a sweet aroma to me, and you're going to have a child. You've been praying for a child. You're going to have one. You call his name John," and all those things. Well, there's a little bit of significance with that, and as we're going to see in just a bit. In Revelation chapter 5, in verse 8, it says, "And golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints." And so that's what incense, in the temple, as they burned incense, the smoke went up. That altar of incense was directly, there was a curtain behind the altar, and on the other side of that curtain was God's presence, was the Holy of Holies was there, but mercy seat. Yeah, thank you. Mine went blank there. The mercy seat with the cherubs and the Ark of the Covenant with all those things in it. And the smoke went up over the curtain into that most holy place. It was symbolic of the prayers of the people. And so that's what the book of Revelation says also. And then in chapter 8 and verse 3 of Revelation, or verse 4, it says, "And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand." And so this incense represents our prayers going up. And so as Jesus, as we know, is our intercessor, he pleads for us on behalf of our lives. He pleads to God, and his prayers go up. So there's significance in the fact that incense was given. And it was also used in the meal offering. They would take meal, like some flour of some sort, and they would mix into it certain things. And one of those things was frankincense. And it helped give a sweet aroma to the food. They offered animals, but they also offered meal as a sacrifice, which it was having to do with their produce, the things that sustained their lives. And just like the prayers, the incense, the prayers go up. Our prayers are like a sweet aroma to God. He loves hearing our prayers because it's a good smell to him. And same thing is this is a blessing to the food as we offer up thanksgiving for the food that we have. And that's the representation of frankincense. Myrrh is very similar. Myrrh also was used as an incense, but it also had other qualities. One of those was it was used as an analgesic. Now, that's kind of a big word. I don't know if everyone knows it, but aspirin is an analgesic. It eases pain. It's a pain reliever. That's what analgesics are. And Jesus, when he was hanging on the cross, he was offered wine mingled with myrrh. Somebody was trying to ease the pain between wine and the myrrh, the analgesic. That would have eased his pain a little bit, but he refused it. He was going to endure the cross. And but anyway, it's a healing kind of thing. And it was used as a preparation for burial. Nicodemus, when Jesus died on the cross, when they were going to bury him, Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes as a burial thing. And so you don't have to think too far before you realize the significance of those things in what happened in Jesus's life. And so these gifts were all earthly gifts for an earthly king, and they all had their significance in what they were given for. But keep in mind that these guys that brought them from the east, all these gifts, they were expecting an earthly king, and what they found was an earthly being, a little baby that they knew was going to become a king. And he certainly was going to become a king, but it wasn't going to be an earthly king. There was a big misconception amongst them and everybody just about the Messiah. Everyone thought the Messiah was going to be an earthly king. Even Jesus's disciples during his lifetime said, "When are you going to establish the kingdom?" And all the people on the triumphal entry day, they laid leaves down in front of him to walk on. They wanted to make him a king right then and there, and be an earthly king. That's why Herod wanted to kill all the babies under 2 years old to make sure he got that king, because he thought it was going to be a physical king as well. But that's not the way it was going to be. Jesus, the man, would never be a king. In fact, he himself said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it was, then my servants would fight." But that's not the way it is. He was led as a sheep to the slaughter, as a lamb before its shearers is dumb or mute. So Jesus went to the cross without trying to offer a defense for himself. And this would have a very profound effect on Jesus's later ministry. People kept trying to make him a king. Kings kept thinking, this guy's trying to usurp authority, and that would have an effect. And it also had an effect on the spreading of the gospel message. As the disciples went out to preach, they were getting in trouble places because they were preaching about this new king. Of course, they were preaching about a spiritual king, a spiritual kingdom, but a lot of those earthly kings didn't know the difference and didn't realize there was such a thing as some other kind of a kingdom. And so it affected that message as well. And so there's a lot to be thought about when you think about that visit of the Magi, the visit of the wise men from the East. It had a lot of significance. And I just encourage everyone to go back to Matthew and read through again what would happen. We're going to look at some more that happened in Matthew chapter 2 next week. When next week we're going to talk about the perils of a baby king. What happened in relation to when these wise men came looking for a king that triggered some events, and we're going to talk about some of those things and get more into the life of Christ. So far, the influence of this little baby had affected forever the lives of those shepherds, the lives of these wise men, and our lives, even without even uttering a single word yet. All of the effect that Jesus had, just even his coming into the world, how impactful that is on our lives 2,000 years later. We're going to be talking about some more of those things next week. But before we have our invitation song, I just want everyone to say, wise men still seek him. There are folks out there now who are still seeking him. They're smart enough to know, they're wise enough to know that there's more to this life than what's going on in their lives right now. And we ourselves can be the star that leads them to the bright and morning star, who is Jesus. That's another, he was called the bright and morning star. And we can be a star that leads the way to the great bright and morning star, Jesus. And just like it was such a blessing to those wise men to be led, to be able to kneel at the feet of the king of the universe. They didn't know it at the time. They just suspected a little earthly king, but to be able to kneel at the feet of this one, a tremendous blessing. Well, we can lead people to kneel at the feet of Jesus too. So I just encourage us to be inspired by that. And it's a great it's a wonderful thing that you're doing when you try to talk to somebody about the gospel. It's not a job. It's not a thing that you have to do. It's a blessing that you can give to somebody. So if you're here and you have not been led to this bright and morning star yet, I just encourage you to think about it and just, as it was a blessing to so many people, it can be a blessing to you too. If you're subject to the gospel call in any way whatsoever, we're going to sing this song, What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and certainly what a friend we do have. We'll sing this song. If you're subject to the invitation, you can come while together we stand and sing.